So in the film, we took a look back to the last decade or more, decade and a half, and now we're going to talk about what has changed in terms of the news business since, spoiler alert, everything, and what it may portend for the business and the cause of local news into the future. And to explore these issues, we've assembled a panel of folks who look at the questions raised with a range of perspective. On my left is Dr. Jennifer Holt, Associate Professor and Chair of UCSB's Department of Film and Media Studies. She is the author or editor of 5 books about digital media and has lectured across the country and around the world on the subject. Her forthcoming book is titled Cloud Policy. Sarah Sinclair is the Advertising Director of the Santa Barbara Independent and the former advertising director of the news press. She couldn't stay away from those going away parties. And she has straddled and successfully navigated the epic transition from the before times print business model to the economics of the digital age. Gwyn Lurie is CEO and editor-in-chief of the Montecito Journal Media Group, who led a group of investors that purchased that weekly paper in 2019 and since has launched a series of other publications that provide alternative revenue streams to support community journalism. Lily Dallow is the Digital Content Director at KEYT, a multimedia journalist whose training and skills in telling stories with multiple means of communication, including print, images, audio, and video, position her as a prototypical journalist adapted to the new era of constant technological change. And Ryan P. Cruz is a staff reporter for The Independent who not only covers traditional news beats, but also focuses much of his work on Latino communities and culture, which historically have been overlooked in local news coverage, even as they constitute a growing portion of the population. So I want to frame the discussion this way. Citizen McCaw tells the story of the decline of a local news organization under circumstances that are in many ways uniquely local, we'll say. But in other ways, it's a story that's been repeated again and again across the U.S. since the movie came out over the past 15 years. Not long ago, New York Times executive editor Dean Baquet said, "I think most local newspapers in America are going to die in the next 5 years, except for the ones that have been bought by a local billionaire." Well, he was talking about Jeff Bezos, I think. But so more than 2,000 American newspapers have closed their doors and stopped their presses since 2004. Yet a Pew Institute study in 2019 found that most Americans, 3 of 4 respondents, believe that local news outlets are in good financial shape. So there seems to be a blind spot among part of the public about the fact that quality local reporting requires time, expertise, talent, and institutional knowledge. So I want to start talking about what the media landscape looks now, to get a better understanding of the world we're living in, the digital information world, and how this change has disrupted the business models of traditional news media, and what local news organizations are doing to adapt and harness the opportunities. And then I want to talk to these 2 journalists who are young and looking to the future. They're more than geezers like myself, but who have grown up with and currently work in the new media landscape, what they see ahead professionally and personally as a matter of public interest. Jennifer, I want to start with you. Citizen McCaw ends in 2008. What has changed in the way people receive, process, define, and interact with news since then? I know it's absurd to ask her to explain that in 5 minutes, so there is an extended interview with Jennifer on newsmakers.com, but give us the broad strokes of that.
Okay. In 5 minutes or less, it's interesting to talk to a group of people like this who are accustomed to not just creating the news, but reading newspapers. I'm used to talking to an audience of students who have never been taught to read a newspaper, who have never thought to read a newspaper. Their idea of engaging with news is, going like this. And it's a very different cultural experience. And so this is a kind of interesting, different experience for me to talk to people who are used to reading newspapers. I think the biggest deal, obviously, is the shift to digital, but that is not just, that's much more than a change in technology. It's a change in cultural practice. It's a change in business models. So now most of the business revenue goes to Facebook and Google. That's just where it goes, and that's evacuated the support for traditional newspapers to the point that the story we saw just has been repeated thousands and thousands and thousands of times since that film was made. And now nearly 2/3 of the counties in the U.S. have no daily newspaper. And without the local, with the loss of the local, we have a loss of all power for the public and all public accountability, because all seeds of power and political power are sowed locally. And this kind of tragedy that we watched play out on a local level, this is playing out on such a national and global scale now that this is kind of what I think about all the time, the real tragedy that is this compounded over and over. And part of it is a loss of business revenue, a change in the business model. It's also a loss, an evacuation of faith in our idea of the truth. When you go now to read the news, it's choose your own adventure. And you go on a social media site that echoes your own ideological leaning and your own bubble. And we have things called alternative facts. And we have ways of engaging with news that are driven by a data-driven click model that rewards hyper-partisanship, it rewards lies, it rewards salacious content much more than it rewards just run-of-the-mill factual material. So this kind of architecture of social media, which is now an echo chamber, is also a place where lies travel a lot faster than the truth, and they're a lot more profitable than the truth, which is just a sad reality of the landscape that news is existing in online. We also have the spread of fake news at a speed that we can't even keep up with. And frankly, we don't have media literacy programs that are equipped to teach people how to engage with news and discern what is factual and what isn't. I think any kid who has a phone should be required to take media literacy classes. They can't wait until they meet me when they're 20 years old, or, worse, never take one in the first place. So we don't have any kind of media literacy that approximates the urgent situation that we're in for democracy. And we also have the consolidation of what's left into the hands of private equity firms and vulture capital hedge funds that gut newsrooms like we saw, treat news like it's just a commodity on the open market. And the loss of the local with this loss of public accountability is just a direct line to corruption. I'm from Chicago, so you can just ask me about that. That's our brand. So we learn about that young in where I'm from. But this kind of consolidation of what's left, these kind of shells of the newspapers themselves into the hands of private equity is kind of like the final death knell to me. And we don't have a culture of reading the news. I was taught how to read a newspaper when I was a kid. You open the paper, you look and you see who the Cubs lost to yesterday, and then you go and you read the comics, and then you read about the latest alderman in jail, and they teach, your family taught you how to read the paper, and there's a thing, it's on the table, it's a newspaper. We don't have that culture anymore, and so getting kids and getting young people into the habit of wanting to know what's happening and understanding how to read what's in front of them, I think is another big crisis we're facing.
Given that uplifting assessment, Sarah, you have uniquely had a successful career working to pay for local news as a product, both in the before times, when the business model for dominant daily newspapers is relatively simple. You sell an audience to advertisers that you gather as a general interest publication. But also today, when that model's been demolished, what has changed from your perspective, and what is the key to sustaining a local news enterprise going forward?
That's another big question that answering in 5 minutes is pretty close to impossible. And before I answer, I want to really sincerely thank you and Hap and everyone else who put this evening together. I didn't realize how emotional I was going to be watching the movie again. It was 2008 or 2009 when we all watched at the Arlington. And for me, the trauma of, and I don't use that word lightly, the trauma of what we had just gone through at the news press was such that I think we were clinging together. And now to be able to see the film again and to have it presented in this way with, as again, emotional as I am watching what we had back then, to put it in the perspective of the future is really helpful. And to be able to gather with, friends that I worked with at the news press and current colleagues at the Independent, and so many friends and interested people in the community, and family members. My mom's here too. So as I said, big question. I'm glad that Jennifer gave her answer from a scholarly perspective, because for me, I've been working really in the trenches on this for the last 37 years. I started at the news press right out of UCSB. I was 24 years old, and I started in 1986, just a few months after the New York Times Company had bought the news press. So when I think about what has changed back in 1986, besides the fact that the rooms were full of cigarette smoke, we were typing on typewriters. I think, I came in as a classified ad sales rep, and we were just transitioning to word processors. But, there was no email, there was no internet. And from a business perspective, and I need to say that everything I'm going to say is from the business side of the paper. So the fact that there was no internet, and, we weren't Googling because there was no Google, and there was no Craigslist, no Indeed.com, no Realtor.com, all of those competitors that came along later, we were really selling against TV and radio and the yellow pages. That was our landscape. And so in those 37 years that I've been working in this industry, everything in that regard has changed. All of the platforms that we've used, all the tools have used, but the one thing that has remained the same, and I think it's the key to looking at where we are going forward, is the relationship between trusted local news and readers who want that news, and again, from the business side, the businesses who want to be in front of those readers that want that trusted source. Back in the day at the news press, and for the 10 years that I've worked at the Independent, our strength is really the quality of our news coverage, and that's where that triangle relationship that I described comes from. And at the Independent, and I can't help but speak of it from the current Independent perspective, our print product We have 68,000 readers every week, and 71% of those readers have read at least 3 of the last 4 issues, and 58% of those readers have been reading the Independent for at least 10 years. And I'll stop with the statistics because you're going to think that I'm trying to sell you something, and, you know, sidebar, I cannot help but sell. It's what I do. And if anyone out there is interested in advertising, you know, come see me. But obviously, readers get their news in different ways now. That's, you know, that's super, super obvious, and I don't need to go into detail on that. So for the Independent, that means that not only do we still have our beloved print product, but we're stoking the fires of our website every day. We have 330,000 readers every month. You're all familiar with that. But we also have broadened our platforms such that we've got a podcast, we've got digital display ads, we've got newsletters, we've got all of these other products, and many of our readers are consuming our product in multiple of those vehicles. So we're living and breathing that every day. However, I can talk about how strong we are, but anyone in this sphere who says they're making money hand over fist is lying. If you've seen this week's issue of the Carpinteria Coastal View, they have a full-page notice on page 3 telling their readers, you know, and they're loyal little Carpinteria readers, that if they don't get more support, they're going to be closed by the end of this year. So, you know, that's the reality that we're facing. One leg of the stool that we haven't talked about, and it's an area that we newly focused with the Independent, is reader revenue. So we have ways that our readers can support us through donations and subscriptions. We have a nonprofit fund called the Mickey Flax Journalism Fund, produced in cooperation with SB Can, so that donations go directly to social justice and environmental reporting. So there are all these different ways that we are reaching out. Our publisher, Brandy Rivera, who's much more an expert on some of this than I am, she's very involved nationally in looking at legislation, you know, legislative changes that are coming down the pike. We're also involved right now in a Google News initiative. Yep, we're taking dollars from Google.
Better than the other way around.
Exactly, and we're used to the other way around. You know, that is part of a digital transformation project. We were one of 40 publishers chosen for this project, and we're working on a specific project for that. But so to sum it up, you know, I would say that everything about the tools that we use has changed, the tools and platforms, but that core reason that we are viable, the core reason that our readers want to, you know, that they need us, and that our advertising clients still want to be in front of those readers, is the local community-focused journalism. So thank you.
Wow. So, Gwyn, you led a group of investors in purchasing the Montecito Journal in 2019 when it was a small standalone print product, and you said improved the paper and also created a bunch of new products providing alternative revenue streams. Can you talk about what the business model of the Montecito Journal Media Group LLC is, and how you're, you know, trying to navigate this stormy waters that we've heard described?
Well, that's a very good question, Jerry. Providing news is expensive. Investigative journalism, good investigative journalism is expensive. And unless people and businesses are willing to pay for it, it's very, very hard to provide it. And one of the things that we've done in the last few years is tried to create as many alternative revenue streams as possible that were content-based, that would allow us to be able to pay to put out our newspaper and, you know, do it as well as we can. Although our newspaper does make money, and it has made more money every year. We're making money hand over fist. But I will say that You know, one of the things that we've tried to do is, and let me back up. We have benefited certainly from kind of Montecito being in the world's consciousness as the it girl of places. Thank you, Megan and Harry. But, you know, we've tried to create magazines that have real content that you can't finish before you get to the checkout stand. But the truth is, Les Firestein, my husband, who is the editor of our magazines, I couldn't afford to pay him if I wasn't sleeping with him. And that is the truth. I mean, he's a brilliant writer, he's an incredibly creative mind, but it's very hard to be able to afford great writers. And the people who are great writers in this community are doing it out of a love for journalism and a love for community. But people deserve to be paid. People should be able to pay their rent. People should be able to, you know, send their kids to school. And I think that, you know, Jennifer, you talked a little bit about media literacy. And I think that's very important, but I do believe that we're living in a time where even with media literacy, it's very hard to recognize the truth. And I think that it was interesting because obviously AI, and we haven't talked about that yet, Jerry, and I don't know if you're planning on it, but that is on all of our minds right now. And recently in an interview I was lucky enough to do with Maria Ressa when she was here for the Arts and Lecture program, and she talks about in her book as well that there was a survey done in Silicon Valley amongst the top 800 people who had worked on developing AI, and that 50% of the people who answered the survey said that they believed that it was going to lead to an extinction event. And that means extinction, like us. And, you know, and she talked about that not...
I hope we finish the panel first, though.
Anyway, you asked me for my business model, and the business model is to create really good content that is interesting, some of which we're pushing out well beyond Santa Barbara. Some is just for Santa Barbara. The Giving List project has been interesting. We're launching our first national Giving List Women, which is a very exciting project. But I will say that I have had more times than I can recount people say to me before they're willing to pay for something, "Are you guys making money on this?" As if there's shame if there's a profit in it, as though we are working for free, as though we are, and I think that's very interesting, and I do think that there's no question that there is a positive correlation between news deserts and corruption, and I think we see it here, frankly. And I think Santa Barbara, and I'm not from Santa Barbara, I've been here for well over a decade, but this is a small town, and people have long-time relationships, and people have friendships with elected officials, and people have friendships with school officials, and it's hard to write negative things about people you have dinner with, and people you have lunch with, and people who are teaching your kids. But it's critical, and that is for sure the hardest part of my job, our job, so.
All right, thanks.
I'm not sure I really answered your question.
Well, I'll follow up, don't worry. So Lily Dallow, you are, grew up in Santa Barbara. You are a multimedia journalist who's converted your Cal Poly journalism degree into a gig as digital content director at KEYT. Talk about the multi-platform storytelling skills that you need to do a job like that, what that really involves, and how do you foresee, you know, kind of finding employment doing that sort of thing over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, luckily I've found employment, so step one. In the film, you said local news is the glue for community, And in my upbringing, that's been social media. So growing up and always knowing what's going on in everybody else's life, it's pretty cool. With that, at the end of the film, you talked about the excitement of when somebody will bring in a picture for the fires, but now everybody takes pictures and everybody posts them. And even now, when I run breaking news, we have to wait for the public information officers to tweet the information. We'll listen to the police scanners and we'll call CHP and the sheriff's office, and they'll say, you know as much as we do. When we find out more, we'll tweet it. So that's our breaking news now. Unless we can send somebody to the scene, which John Palmentary is always there, thankfully. But yeah, so I mean, even during the winter storms, when I was going in early from 5 in the morning till 5 p.m., listening to the police scanners, calling all these, local leaders and updating about road closures and posting on social media, and I had all of my friends and family texting me, asking what's going on. I'm like, just read my stuff. It's right there. I'd take a break, and I'd look at my phone, my group chat with my friends, and one of my friends that lives here would send a TikTok of what's going on, just somebody explaining, stepping outside and showing everybody all the floods, and I'd sit back, and I'm like, what am I doing? if everybody can get it that easily. But so my hope is that we can grow with the emerging technology and how it's evolving. And in my mind, it's exciting because there's so much communication. I mean, it's a bigger beast because now everybody has a platform to put out their own type of news. But it just makes it even more important that we upkeep the quality of our work. And like you were saying, it's expensive, or it should be. But yeah.
All right, thank you. On AI, I have a confession to make, which is I spent a half hour this morning asking GPT to write jokes for this event.
You got one?
And they weren't funny. None of them were funny. It was.
You know what is funny? I actually, when I was trying to prepare for this panel, I was coming up with ideas, and I was having a full-on conversation with ChatGPT about the points I could talk about. They're all my ideas. And the little summary that I wrote out, I texted to myself, and I have it open on my phone in case I needed it. So there's your ChatGPT joke.
What did ChatGPT think of it?
It was like, you're so smart. You don't need me.
Just be better than your jokes, Jerry.
Jerry, you can't be replaced by AI. It's impossible.
No AI, yeah. Although Lily makes me feel like I'm 92. All right. So Ryan Cruz, also born and raised in Santa Barbara, and in the 3 years you've been at the Independent, you have expanded the paper's recognition and coverage of Spanish-speaking communities that historically have lacked visibility in local media. As Latinos represent a growing portion of the local population, what are the opportunities and obstacles for local news organizations to reach this audience that you see?
Well, that was something that was very important to me when I started working at the Independent, and Brandy and Marianne, they give me the freedom to kind of criticize that our coverage was very white-leaning before, and it wasn't for lack of trying. It's really hard to really go and empathize and understand these communities, and growing up here, it's, I felt like it was kind of my responsibility, and I come from these areas, and I am able to connect in a different way and understand where they're coming from, and just having the freedom to be able to do that and reach out in these communities and tell these stories that, like you said, is a big portion of our community, but is not, portrayed in the media in the same way. They do read. They do read the news. They do look up the news, and they always want to be in tune to what's in. And when they see themselves in, and they write back, and then they start telling their friends, they want to tell your story. They can trust you with your story. And that is something that I feel like it's kind of my responsibility and something that I want to keep up in Santa Barbara. And I'm lucky enough to work with Nick Welsh every week and have him, have his long emails after I publish a story telling me things, well, we could go in this and stuff like that makes me feel very lucky to live in this community. And watching that documentary, one thing that stuck out was Wendy saying, the youth, they're texting, they're on MySpace, they don't read the news. And I'm that youth she was talking about at that time. I was probably in high school at that time. And I read the news, and I know that kids my age and people that are grown up now are in tune with the news, and it's in a different way. Like Dr. Holt said, like all you guys are saying, it's on social media, and that is how people get their news. But that's why it's so important to have journalists who understand and can put things into context, because we're flooded with, a big example is something that just happened, which was a social media-based event that happened in the protest that was a couple blocks away a couple weekends ago, and that was led through social media, and I found out about it through social media. And with that, there's good and bad, because, an activist that came along with that is somebody that was born and bred on social media and wasn't a trained journalist, so they had a different approach to how they handled it, and that might not be the most responsible approach. And so when I'm learning about all that information coming in, I'm trying to find out what happened, what was the original incident, what people are upset about, and what's the actual reaction here. And I think that's really important for somebody to be from here to understand things like that, because there were so many posts about that, and you can go in hundreds of comments of people who don't really understand what's going on, but have very passionate opinions. And I think it's important to have, these news sites and newspapers, and I'm lucky to work at somebody that's still doing print in town, and to be able to explain context of these things that are on social media.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. So Jennifer, I want to build on Lily's comments first. When she talked about all the news is on social media, can you talk about, given that, is there room for quote unquote independent, balanced, fair, whatever word you want to use, news organizations, or are we headed to a place where the whole definition of news is kind of lost into what it is you're seeing on your phone in any particular second?
I think there's certainly space for it. I love listening to what Ryan said, because it's so hopeful that there are people your age that are really starting to kind of think so critically about what you're reading, and that's all I try to get my students to do. So there's certainly space for it. But whether it can survive in the sea of kind of inflammatory, partisan, salacious kind of information that, frankly, is spreading much quicker than anything as banal as a news story. So there is space. It's interesting to think about the idea of space, right, in the spectrum, in the digital spectrum. There's infinite space of some kind. But
There's space for newsmakers, there's space for anything. That's hard.
but to think about how it's rewarded or how it's supported is another deal entirely. And so the news that you all work so hard to create, the news that reputable news organizations create, that is in a very precarious position right now, because the money is being funneled much quicker and in a devastating way, to devastating effect, to disinformation and misinformation and other material that spreads much more easily and readily in the digital space. That business model doesn't care whether it's true or not for people to click on it. In fact, it's better if it's not, because then you're more likely to click. And so I don't know, the question is, can it survive? That's a thing that keeps me up at night, but there's room.
Can you just say a word about how Google and Facebook became these behemoths, how they, collect 80% or whatever it is of advertising? And then I want to ask
Sure.
Sarah about how that affects her business.
Sure. The interesting thing, I don't know what people know about how ads are bought and sold online. It's kind of like a stock market kind of thing. And Google's parent company, Alphabet, they make 90+% of their revenue from ad sales. But they also own the infrastructure of that business. And so they own DoubleClick, they own Ad Exchange, they negotiate, they set the prices, and then they sell the ads to themselves. And so it's a great racket. And so, the FTC has, in the past, not found any problem with this arrangement. And when Google purchased DoubleClick around the same time that this was all happening in 2008, they bought it after a bidding war with Microsoft. The FTC said, okay, sounds good. No problem there. And then almost immediately, of course, Google began very predictably restricting its competitors' access to information, privileging its own properties, and by 2020, the company was selling 85% of the ads that it brokered to itself. So they just kind of kept buying up more and more of the intermediaries and the infrastructure of this market that brokers the ads. So a big part of this problem is dealing with, billion-dollar digital media conglomerates that we don't control as a society anymore.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, that's, I'm glad we had this talk.
I can
Sarah, yeah, pick up on that.
Yeah, and jump in on one more sort of related thing is that, when we're talking about, and I don't even want to talk about the billion-dollar giants and how I feel about what Jennifer just said, but also looking at social media, and like Lily said, that's where a lot of people are getting their news these days, and what Facebook or Meta is doing to the accurate news sources that it is using to disseminate some of the news. They change their algorithms all the time. They, punish us sometimes for having accurate, local, well-researched journalism. So there's that whole aspect of it too. But there's what was I going to say? To the question of is there space for it, and Ryan and Lily being young and interested in journalism, is that an anomaly? I think locally, at least, all it takes is a story or a topic that you're passionate about, and whether it is like the protest a couple of weeks ago or something that's happening in city council, that's where people realize that. And again, I'll sound like I'm like an ad for the Independent, but that's when I see what our reporters are doing. And I'll take a topic that most of us are familiar with, given what we just watched. Nick Welsh's cover story about the closing of the news press. So some of us live and breathe that, but for the community that is interested in that topic to be able to read that kind of well-researched story that gave history, et cetera, that's the difference between what they're going to get on a Twitter post or on Facebook and what they're going to get from journalists with historic information that are reporting on any given topic.
Yeah. So Gwyn, obviously the morning paper had been in decline for some years, but now that it's literally out of business, bankruptcy, are there opportunities for your company, both journalistically and from the business side, that in a funny way this could be helpful to your business that they've gone to bankruptcy? Or do you see it just as a bad thing for all of us altogether?
I see it as a bad thing for all of us altogether. I don't think that losing a daily newspaper in this community is good for anybody. It's a very tough business to be in, the daily news. It's hard enough being the complaint department once a week, being it every day. I think that would be very hard. But it's important. It's really important. And, you know, I want to say that I have a lot of confidence in this generation. I have a ton of confidence in this generation. I think they're smart. I think they're open-minded. And I think that I have this, I do, I really do.
No, you missed the fist bump.
Oh, okay. I have this framed Mad magazine. They don't even know what Mad magazine is, but I have this framed Mad magazine comic at home of Alfred E. Newman, and he's on this tree swing, a tire swing hanging from a tree, and he's holding up the branch as he's swinging. And he doesn't realize that the branch is not connected to the tree. And there's no subcaption on it, but if there were, it would say, they don't know, he doesn't know he can't, so he can. Or I'd flip it if I were writing well. But I think that we need to think differently about things, and I don't think we're ever going to go back. I don't think you're ever going to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Social media is not going away, but we all have a voice, and I think that we need to insist with our elected officials and that there are guardrails put on social media. Because that's the problem. The problem is no one takes responsibility for what's printed online. And so lies are allowed to fester and spread, as you said, much faster than the truth ever could. So, I mean, I think that's the problem. But things are going to change. It's going to change, and we're seeing it in front of us. But the one thing I do want to end on is I think that it is a fallacy, a myth, that news was ever an objective thing. I think there's truth that we should all be in pursuit of. But just by virtue of what you report on and what you don't report on, it's subjective. And having come from the television news world, I started at ABC News back in the 80s, and we used to sit in editorial meetings, and every day we say, okay, what's above the fold in the New York Times? And 90% of the stories above the fold in the New York Times were put on the cover by Hill & Knowlton, the PR firm, or some other big PR firm. And there were stories that we didn't report on because someone had a relationship with someone in the White House and they didn't. I mean, these kinds of things have always gone on, all the way back to William Randolph Hearst and beyond. So it's not a new thing that there's subjectivity and some shading of the truth in journalism. I mean, I think that's not a new thing.
Yeah, I think Carl Bernstein said it was, your responsibility was to produce the best verifiable version of the truth that day. And that's
I think that's fair.
what they did. So Lily, a lot of the movie was focused on the issue of credibility and who has credibility, and, readers want credibility. How do you sort through the zillions of TikToks and tweets and Instagram, whatever the hell they're called, reels, right? Yeah. See, I'm up on. I mean, when you sort through it, how do you know what is credible and what is not?
You don't, a lot of the time. We make sure that we get all of our video either from our own staff or from official sources. But with videos like the one that went viral the other weekend, that, it's just right there in front of you. The woman saying those words, don't really need to verify that happened because it's right there in the video. So it's either right there in the video, or it's coming from an official source or somebody on our team. But I did want to go back to the conversation about algorithm-based technologies, because as digital director, I've been trying to look into, how to bypass that, which you can't. But to play into it, you have to have really high quality content, and it's no longer is it just, paper or TV. It's a short video that's not too short to where you're lying or creating clickbait, but it can't be too long. Like on Instagram, you can only post a reel that's 1.5 minutes, and you don't want to take out any of the critical information because then you're just not being transparent. So it's the length and the quality of that video, and then on top of that, it's what you put in the caption, SEO, search engine optimization, and using the right words and the right hashtags. And then to get to the algorithm, to where the algorithm will support your content, you have to post consistently at the right time, if the stars align, and yeah, just multiple times a week. But in order to produce a video like that, you have to have the right content. Like for us, we were on the same wavelength as that story that went viral. And so lucky enough, as I was piecing that Instagram reel together, the news came in that the police recommended these charges to the DA. And so I was lucky to be at the front of that when we published the reel with that new bit of information. But originally it was just gonna be that story from the weekend, because that's how, I'm one person. That's how long it takes me to put all that information together into one video where you're scrolling on your phone and you're looking at a picture of your cousin's newborn baby, and then the next thing is this reel that took a whole day to put together, and if it doesn't hold your attention, you just scroll on to the next one. So to keep up with this emerging technology and the algorithms, you need more people at the forefront of it and who learn how to use it. And it can be an extremely powerful tool, just like AI can be, where you can reach, like that reel that I posted has reached over 200,000 views. And there was one that I posted when the whole alien whistleblower things were going, that reached 700,000 views. Like, I've never written a story that reached more than maybe 50,000 views, and that was from the winter storms. So it's a really powerful tool. It's just you have to learn how to use it. And unfortunately, the teachers who are going to teach people how to use it are us right now.
So as a journalist, how did it make you feel about the state of journalism that 700,000 people watched the guy who said there was an alien at Vandenberg versus the 50,000 that might, maybe for the city council if it gets heated or something?
People love crazy stuff. It's just the fact. And also, weather content gets a lot of views. And it's just because weather, affects everybody. Traffic, like roadblocks, that's probably right next to it. But then everything below, if people see it and they're like, oh, this doesn't pertain to me, scroll on to the next thing. So it's...
Presidents indicted.
Yeah, but seriously.
So, Ryan, we've been talking about this story that happened up on Garden Street. Can you just briefly kind of reconstruct how that went down, how you found out about it? Did you just happen to be scrolling, and what happened after that?
That kind of goes into how we use social media as a tool. I use social media every day. I kind of, not just for entertainment, I follow a lot of people who are actual news sites, and then independent people who just post up-to-date news commentary and stuff like that. And so that was a local activist, Michael Montenegro. He actually posted it, and I talk with him a lot about things that are happening in town, and he posted it, and I first thought he was helping organize it, and then that's when we start calling our web manager, and he was able to go down there and be there, take some videos and photos. And that whole time I'm, DMing people, calling people, and that's something that we probably use a lot more than journalists in the movie that we saw. Like DMing and reaching out through social media is a viable way to meet sources, get credible information from people because they can see there right away when they get a DM, and they're on their Instagram and they're on their TikTok just as much as I am. So I found out through that, and then I start kind of trying to...
This is the lady who got in the beef with the construction.
Yeah, so the video itself came out, and of course, it made a lot of people upset. And then it was the phenomenon of this person who has a huge following kind of jumping on this cause. And it's kind of, it's a symptom of these times that we have people that are, you know, making money or making a living just as a personality, an influencer. And that doesn't always mean they are a credible journalist, because, you know, he kind of, to tell honestly, he messed up the reporting for me because he had portrayed himself as a journalist, and he posted a video where he was on the phone with this woman, and he said, "I'm a journalist," and, you know, that made me upset, like, in my stomach, to hear people that aren't actually doing reporting, you know, portraying them. And then when I call her, you know, of course she says, "I've been burned before. This guy said he was a journalist." So you have to work around, and the rules are just different nowadays, and it's a whole different landscape. And I kind of just think I'm lucky that I don't know the before times. I don't know what it's like to have a newsroom with, you know, a lot of people, or we have to be very resourceful, and that's using social media and trying to, you know, find how my story can be informative to my community, people that are from here, in a different way than, you know, I could have leaned into what this guy was doing and make it about street vendors and this huge thing, when I didn't think that was the case. I think it was this really offensive video and situation, and that's what should be followed up on. And I tried to stay focused to what that was for our community, and that's what I wanted to put out in the story.
All right, the hour's late. I want to ask one more question and just get everybody's take on this. Tom Rosenstiel, who's the executive director of the American Press Institute, said recently, "If we don't monitor power at the local level, there will be massive abuse of power at the local level." And the media critic Margaret Sullivan says, "When local news fails, the foundations of democracy weaken. The public, which depends on accurate factual information in order to make good decisions, suffers. The consequences may not always be obvious, but they are insidious." Shout out cannabis ordinance. So what do you see as the future of local news, as that public interest, public trust, doing it to serve readers and viewers and taxpayers? Is there a future that is financially sound or not, do you think, Jennifer?
I mean, I'm feeling the gospel of Ryan over here. I mean, and Lily, I mean, you know, to me, I actually do learn quite a bit about my local community on TikTok, and I love it. I find it totally fascinating. I wouldn't try to venture to predict. Yeah, it's a fool's But I do see the energy around social media. I see the energy around, I'm very heartened by how seriously you take journalistic ethics on social media platforms to create news. That does my heart so much good, and that gives me massive amounts of hope. As for the news organizations themselves, there's always going to be a need and a huge desire for local news. So we just have to find a way to support it. But I don't think the desire for it will go away, and I don't think the passion for telling local stories and keeping local officials accountable will ever go away. The financial support is what we need to protect somehow.
I will answer your question with a resounding yes. You know, I do not have all the answers. We're working to find those answers and to grow those answers every single day. It's funny, you know, I am not dazzled so much by listening to Ryan talk, because that's, you know, when I have the privilege of being in or near our newsroom, that's what they're living and breathing every day. And yeah, the film we watched tonight, you know, when you read some of Wendy's answers, not in Wendy's official voice, you know, that's what we're combating. You know, we are, and I say we, I mean all legit local, or not local, you know, all legit journalistic enterprises are working to preserve that every day. That, you know, I see that in action. I see that with what you do, Jerry. I see that with all of our local media companies. The challenge is monetizing it. And I won't repeat myself, but that's what I've been in the trenches working on for 37 years. It's changed, but we just have to keep changing with it. And we are.
Yeah. Gwyn, you wrote a really lovely column about the news press going down a couple of weeks ago and talked about the importance to democracy and those issues. What do you think? Is there a sustainable interest and market for that kind of important information that you referenced that local news ought to be producing?
I think so. And I think there must be. There must be. And I think it takes serious, concerted investigative reporting to really understand what's going on behind closed doors in government, especially these, maybe always. But I think it's a big problem in our country. I think it's a big problem in our town, to be honest. And in general, as a general rule, I don't think it's a good idea when billionaires own newspapers. I don't think it's a good idea when billionaires run for president. I think that one of the things that worked out really well when I raised money to buy the newspaper was that I actually went into it hoping that one or two people would write a really big check, and it didn't work out that way, and I ended up with 30 investors, which turned out to be inadvertently brilliant. So I take no responsibility for it, but it was the best thing that happened because absolutely no one has any say in what we write about or what we do. And in fact, one of our investors, as he signed the deal, looked at me and said, "You know, this is the worst deal I've ever signed in my life." And I took great pride in that. But it has freed us up to do whatever we want. So in short, I think we need alternative revenue streams. I think that people need to understand the importance of journalism and support it. And I think we need to be brave, and I think we need to be willing to lose in order to win. And that means offending some of our friends and taking a serious approach to trying to tell the truth about what's going on.
Lily, you had a piece about the marshal of the Fiesta Parade, and it was more than a piece because it was made of multiple parts. There was you had a story with actual words. You had social media videos. You also had an extended video clip of the interview. Do you think that the written word is over, and that really short videos is going to be what people are going to be only looking at in the short to midterm future?
I don't think it's over because it all starts from the written word, at least on my end. And when I went into journalism, it was because I wanted to write. That's literally the seed that started all of this, that got me to here on the stage. But as I went through Cal Poly, and it was there, journalism is a Bachelor of Science because of all the technology that we use and all the media that we learn. It just got me even more excited. Like, there's just so much more to it. I can still write, but on top of it, I get to portray these stories in different ways where you're not only just reading it, but you get to watch it, you get to hear it, you get to comment about it, and the goal is to open up communication about this and bring people together and amplify these stories. So I think that it's just exciting the way that it's going.
All right. Ryan, there was a PEN American study in 2019 said as local journalism declines, government officials conduct themselves with less integrity, efficiency, and effectiveness, and corporate malfeasance goes unchecked. With the loss of local news, citizens are less politically informed, less likely to vote, and less likely to run for office. You know, we had 65 people in the newsroom, Ryan, and I don't know, maybe half a dozen you have now in the independent full-time doing that. How overwhelmed do you feel by the the kinds of things that Gwyn references are going on in our community that we're not able to get to?
It's trying to do as much as you can with the resources you have. And of course, if we had 20 people, you know, I could focus my whole, just 2 weeks on one story, and I could bury myself in that. And, you know, when we have a cover story, we kind of do that, but we also have to cover the day-to-day stuff. And it's just, the pace is changed, and I think I'm used to that, and I don't know any different. But to me, it's really important to cover City Hall, cover things that are happening in the community, because people do care. People care about housing. People care about, you know, these big topics about trying to pay their rent. It's a huge thing in Santa Barbara. And to make sure that the things that are happening in the boardrooms, in City Council, are reflecting what the community is actually thinking and is going through. You know, State Street is always a huge thing. Anything that having to do with hotels, you know, because it's a bigger thing than just another hotel being approved. It's what direction are we going, and people are seeing that. And, you know, like Dr. Holt said, like not everybody has media literacy, and not everybody has, you know, civics literacy, and not everybody knows how the process works and when to go talk at City Council. So it's really important to have somebody who can put it into context and let people know what's happening and what decisions are being made. And then what these leaders are saying, and making sure those decisions reflect that. And if they're not, you know, the stories can point out what is different there.
All right. All right. Well, we're going to leave it there. Thank you. Dr. Jennifer Holt, Sarah Sinclair, Gwyn Lurie, Lily Dallow, and Ryan P. Cruz. And thank all of you for coming tonight and for hanging in with us. It's been a great evening. Thank you.